Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Yvonne Priest Show. I'm your host, Yvonne Priest, your little ray of darkness. And today we're going to be talking with writer and director David Welling. How are you today, mate? Welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
I'm very good, very good. It's a terribly stinking hot day in Melbourne, but we're surviving, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. Alrighty, so you currently have your debut feature out, Surrogate, which is doing fantastic around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so sorry, it's a paranormal ghost horror film. So it's starring Kes Mirassi, who was the lead in Wolf Creek, most
Mm-hmm.
well known for that great image of her on the poster, covered in blood in the middle of the street. And she's a single mother, and she gets rushed to hospital with a really strange medical condition that happens. And it actually turns out with tests that she gave birth, but she's not pregnant. And then things start to really go out of control, and she's forced to save her family, or tries to save her family from being destroyed around her.
You've got a fantastic cast here as well. Like for a debut feature, not only do you have her, you have Brett Cousins in here as well. You've also got Jane Badler that ended up being in it too. How cool is that for a feature, for a debut feature?
Yeah, the cast was great, and I was going to say we got lucky, but we worked really hard in the casting, and lots of people made really valuable contributions to the film with the casting. It came from different places, some of them. So, for example, with Jane Badler, she came onto the project through Confer Gabbo, who was actually the executive producer who financed the film. And he was in a meeting at Victorian College of the Arts because they're both on the executive board there. And yeah, he said to her, "Do you want to read this script that I'm executive producer on?" And that's how she kind of came across um, the project. And some other people, like, yeah, you mentioned Brett Cousins. He's actually, we've known each other since we're in primary school. We grew up
Oh wow.
in the same suburb, and we're mates. And so I offered him this, the role in Surrogate as Dr. Romero. And he also was able to put me in contact with a couple of other actors because he's been around the acting game for a very long time. And so he gave us particularly the contact with Lou Siverson, who plays the grandmother.
Ah, fantastic. Because he was one of the actors when I saw him. I was like, I haven't seen him in so long. I'm so happy to see him again. Like he's great. How do you feel about the
Mhm.
response you're getting both here and abroad? Do you appreciate it more in Australia than overseas? Because we don't really, as much as we make great horror, we don't seem to push it as much in Australia as we do. It kind of gets pushed after it gets international success.
Yeah, I mean that's the case with a lot of things, and it is. I mean, Australia has a very hardcore horror community that's very passionate about the genre, but horrors don't always do as well here. Traditionally, Australian horrors perform really well in the UK and in the US. So it's been interesting with us. Most of our focus has been in the US market, but also because we're on Tubi, that's actually got is streaming in Mexico as well. So we're actually all these reviews start popping up in Spanish, and people are seeing it around that part of the world, which is really good. And we've just gone out on Amazon in Australia only in about the last 6 to 8 weeks, so it's starting to build a little bit more here. But yeah, for me, kind of anyone around the world who's interested in the film and likes it is yeah, really exciting for us.
So yeah, I tend to find that we're just proving time and time again that Australia can do great horror. So not only do we have this, you have the Wolf Creek films, and you see what the boys for Saw and Sidious have done, and also you have the Raka Boys with having Talk to Me. It can be done, and I really think it's something we should try and push here a little bit more, like some more genre based stuff, because we have a great
Mm.
industry, but I feel like it's just if we can push this and bring more people to the Australian market, like why wouldn't we do it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've had a great history of horror going back either, in the 70s around there. Films were doing really well internationally. And yeah, it would be good to see a little bit more focus on sort of horrors and thrillers, but there is predominantly they're just made as independent films.
Mm.
There's a little bit of reluctance, I guess, with that Talk to Me. I mean, that essentially had an international distributor, but that was a rare one that went through the funding bodies to a degree.
Mhm. Um, with writing this, you ended
Mhm.
up doing a collaborative effort with Beth King, believe so. Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
So is that something you usually do? Do you usually like to do like a collaborative effort when you do your films?
It sort of varies from project to project. I've done stuff where I've just written it myself, and I've done co-writing with different people over the years. And Beth and I, that's probably the best writing collaboration that I've had to this point, because we sort of complement each other with our writing skills. So she's a really big horror fan, so that's why I sort of said to her, hey, we should do let's write a horror film. And because she's just a pure writer, she's not interested in directing or anything. She's just coming from a writing and a character point of view. Whereas from a directorial perspective, I also get a lot more focused on plot and also just visuals and how scenes will play out. So it's kind of combining those two together covers the various disciplines in the script. And yeah, we just we're very good at bouncing ideas off each other and kind of back and forward. And then as we're writing it, there's certain ideas and scenes that are very much hers and others that are very much mine. But every scene in there was edited from a script perspective, so script edited by both of us, and really just sort of try to kind of keep improving each other's writing through all of it.
Nice. So you didn't have a kind of a case of too many chefs in the kitchen at certain points?
No, it was actually, part of it is it's not always that you're agreeing on every idea, because that would be a really big concern if you agreed on everything. It's really sometimes about convincing each other why we should go in this direction or that direction. But by the time we got to the end of the script, we sort of had, we'd nutted everything out, so we were happy on the direction we were going in. And obviously, when it comes down to directing it, then I'm sort of, I'm directing the screenplay how I see it. But Beth, I was involving in parts of the edit. She watched the third cut, so I very much did want to get her feedback on what was happening, and she gave some really good notes on the edit that improved it from going into the fourth and fifth edit of the film.
Oh, nice. So with also you doing screenplay in 2019, you launched the screenplay method program online. What made you want to do that?
So like most filmmakers, I'm doing side jobs in between projects, and one of those is teaching filmmaking and screenwriting. And so I was teaching a couple of screenwriting courses, and I had people from overseas that were interested as well. So I thought I'd put together an online writing course that has a whole bunch of resources. Plus, essentially, the writing course is a series of videos that go from concept through to delivery of a screenplay. And the other really good thing about teaching is it hones your skills as well. So, and when I'm mentoring and working with other writers, it does really start to make you think about all of those kind of writing principles and all the creative process that's involved in it.
That particular program that you've done, is that something that you kind of wish you had when you were starting out?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, it's very practical. So some of the, when I studied filmmaking, I was just very much interested in the practical stuff. And by that, I mean what you'll actually use in a film or as part of writing a screenplay. So everything that's in there is very much what you'll encounter not only when you're writing the screenplay, but once you start to get feedback on that screenplay, and taking into account also when you get on set as well, because a screenplay it's a blueprint for a film and a story. But it's got to be made by a whole bunch of people. So it's not like a novel where you just write it and then put it out there. So I think one of the things I focus on is also working, within the constraints of a production. Like as I say, it's all well and great to write $100 million film, but you need to be able to find the money for $100 million film.
Yeah.
So part of that is where it's very practical, and there's the sections of the course where, if you want to be doing your first feature, which is likely going to be a smaller budget, these are things you can take into consideration that won't blow up your budget. So
no, that's fantastic. I'm actually going to have a bit more of a deep dive into that, because as you know, I've only done scripts for shorts which haven't been made. Hopefully I can get them made at some point, which would be great. I've actually written the first one I did, Devil in the Dark, is actually written for Andy McPhee, the villain. So I know people who know him. So hopefully I can be like, hey, Andy, do you want to look at this script?
excellent. Yeah. And that's how long did it take you to write your short films? You've been working on them for a while, because I have seen some posts about them online.
Devil in the Dark probably took about a year, because I was kind of stopping and starting, had like other jobs I had to do. And then I got COVID, and I was like, you literally have a week to do nothing. Just finish it. You literally have no excuse. And I think I knocked out the ending in probably about 2 days, gave it an edit, sent it to a mate of mine to give a read. And he was just like, I'd start sending this out. I actually sent it to Nathan Hill, and then
Mm-hmm.
he told me about Film Freeway. And then, as you've probably seen with all the, the laurels and stuff, I went a little overboard with my first one. But yeah, I was happy for people just
Yeah.
to read it, let alone actually win something for it, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it's great when that happens when you put it out there, and yeah, especially if it's being received well. That all, I mean, that's a really good piece of advice with writing. Anyway, is if you can put it in some competitions and get some interest, which is what we did with Surrogate early on, because there are so many projects out there, and you've got to find a way that how you can lift yours above others or get interest for people to make it. And screenplay competitions are great for that.
Yeah, definitely. So when you were younger, actually getting into horror, what was probably the movie that you saw where you thought to yourself, I want to make movies?
Um, There's probably two or three main ones. So one of them's a horror, but in terms of sequentially, even though I didn't quite know it at the time, but when I was 5 years old, I saw Beau Geste with Gary Cooper, and I can only remember a few scenes, but it blew my mind away. It's an old black and white 1934 film, and it was on, I think it was Saturday afternoon TV back when they used to run films on Saturday afternoon on television, and that blew me away. But from the two kind of horrors, at the age of 10, a mate and I watched Demons, the Italian kind of zombie demon type film,
Yeah.
which terrified me. You know how everyone has that film they saw at a young age that just terrified the hell out of them when they try to go to sleep that night. Demons was the one that did that for me. And then 2 years later, I saw Dawn of the Dead. And that just, no pun intended, but absolutely blew my mind. And that really solidified that I wanted to make films. And it's still one of my favorite horror films of all time.
My writing started with, I went to a camp um, when I was really young, and this guy had this really cool kind of campfire story that he had. So I was like, I've got to tell everyone about this, but I wanted to write it down. And that was at a time, if you wrote more than one page at school, it was like, wow, you wrote so much kind of thing. And then I started doing basically a novelization of Scream after I watched it in a Spice Girls notebook, of all places for it to go into. And then, yeah, I wanted to kind of write novels, but then I'm like, but I like movies more. And I feel like I
Mm.
can actually bring out my visions better by having it as a film. So, yeah, I've gone from trying to do short stories and novels to then go to screenwriting. And yeah, Scream
Yeah,
started that one for me.
yeah, I love that doing the novelization because I did the same thing after I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it
Oh,
was a school
yes.
project, and I realized I was just rewriting the things. So there must be so many copyright breaches going on in primary school of people trying to do their versions of it. And Campfire is another really good example because that love of horror also comes from, most of us have been on school camps or sitting around a fire at night telling ghost stories, and there's such kind of a staple diet of growing up, and that really does lead into that horror film. And when I'm writing horror, I always trying to imagine it how you'd tell it around a campfire at night.
Yeah, exactly. Because it makes you got that right amount of detail to it. So people would actually get intrigued in it. Otherwise, they'd be like, this is boring kind of thing. You don't want it to
Mm,
seem like some like regular urban legend. You want to seem like it's really kind of cool and unique.
yeah.
So going back to horror in Australia, do you really think that we should take more of a chance on horror? I actually was speaking to a friend of mine who she was working on, I think it was Murderdrome at the time. And she spoke
Mhm.
to a producer who said, oh, we don't do much horror here because we don't really want to promote that kind of violence. And then I was
Mm,
like, wow, but then there's Snowtown. That's a pretty, that one's a bit
yeah.
full on. So why is it when it comes to things that are fictionalized, why do you think that we don't want to finance it or don't want to promote it that much in Australia?
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting one. I mean, part of it comes down to, I mean, certain Aussie indie horrors have done really well. It is a tough market here, and I think I mean, film industry by nature plays things very safe as well.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, funding bodies, and they do a little bit of horror, but not a lot. And that's why I say with Surrogate, we just decided to go independent because we wanted to make sure the film happened and that happened fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So and that was what was great with us is with our finance is that we had creative control because they are really big horror fans as well. But I mean, it's interesting. I haven't heard that like concern at sort of promoting violence because there's plenty of other films that are promoting different types of violence. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Possibly. I mean, part of it maybe also is it's not a reviewer or a festival friendly genre as well. There's that whole thing about horrors don't win major awards at festivals apart from horror film festivals. And
Mhm.
so I think there's a little bit of kind of snobbery or elitism perhaps that goes around the genre. And there's plenty of trash that's made, but trash horror is great, but every genre has trash that's made in
Exactly.
it. And in fact, trash horror is some of the best stuff that to watch from an audience point of view. And I mean, if you go back historically, if you look at the example of the Oscars, all the great horror films through history, none of them are winning Oscars. You get The Exorcist that is a rare one that was getting nominated, but most horror films at the time that are classics now weren't appreciated or liked by reviewers at the time they came out. So if stuff like if you go back to Psycho and all of those places, so it's almost like in retrospect, they go, oh, that's a classic, and now we'll sort of laud it. But yeah, it'd be good if there was more risk taken with that.
Yeah, definitely. Because I remember I went and saw The Loved Ones. It was a very limited release here in Australia. And then after I went and saw it, I went on Amazon UK and you could already buy it on DVD. So it's almost like, or when it gets success in somewhere else, then we'll kind of take it back again. Where maybe because it's a bit violent, it's a bit kind of over the top, but there's an audience for it. As much as people say,
Mm.
yeah, it doesn't win awards, but it puts bums in seats. It's always been that genre.
Yeah, I mean that is kind of a fit for a lot of stuff until you're accepted sort of either in the UK or America. It's harder to be, for something to be accepted here. And the other part is with streaming and stuff now. I mean, there's lots of options to put your film out, but it's also it's very segmented. So yeah, I mean, Surrogate was available overseas. We had a theatrical run in Melbourne, and which it did really well. And it was great watching it with audiences, but it was available overseas for more than a year before it was here. And quite a few of my friends have films that have never been released in Australia, but they're overseas. On things like Tubi or Amazon UK, Amazon US. So yeah, that reluctance. I guess once something gets a reputation as a tough genre to sell, um, people get very fearful of that.
And probably because you'll get people who aren't always horror fans who don't get that there's always going to be horror that's not necessarily scary. It's just going to be something a little bit silly. And if they get silly sometimes, like, oh, this is just a bad movie, when they're not really properly understanding it, maybe that could be a reason.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, it's sort of the pressure on the genre is to be not just scary, but completely terrifying and rocking people's worlds. And horror films will do that, but it's also at certain when you watch it at what age or at what circumstance. So yeah, you can get horrors that are either a bit silly, I mean, or comedy horrors that are fun and grotesque. You also get that they're just they're disconcerting, or there's elements that are chilling, but they're not going to leave you sleepless for days. And that's just an unrealistic expectation to have on horror films. So yeah, I think sometimes that they're seen as not that good because it's not as scary as say Exorcist or whichever film terrifies people. The other night I actually rewatched Lake Mungo, and that's a good example. That it didn't do particularly well at the box office when it came out. It's really built a cult following. When I was looking online, I was surprised you know how well it's doing online, because I saw it when it first came out and it came and went quickly, but it's a really good little found footage horror film.
Mm.
It's not particularly scary, but a few key moments and visuals are really frightening in some of those revelations, but it's not like say Blair Witch found footage that's just unrelenting in its horror.
I think with that movie, because obviously you go into it thinking you're going to get this big scary movie, it completely took a left turn. And I was actually quite impressed that it just really changed your expectations completely of what you were seeing.
Yeah, and it was interesting, also just very well made. It was I thought the cast was actually not excellent in it. It just all felt very, very natural. And John Brawley, who shot that, he actually shot one of my short films just before that. I think that was his first feature film, and he's now shooting, TV series in the US. And his cinematography is beautiful on it. I think yeah, it just works really well as a horror film. But as I said, it's not a completely terrifying. It's a bit more cerebral, I guess. But great film.
Yeah, no, it was really good. It was definitely like it lived up to its hype. Definitely did. I was so happy I'm loving Broly right now. Seriously, I absolutely love that streaming. So, what's a subgenre that you haven't written about yet in horror that you'd actually like to do, like a vampire one or werewolves or something like that?
Um, good question. Probably not those. I mean, I really like zombie stuff, obviously from Dawn of the Dead, but I haven't written any zombie stuff. I mean, I'm writing a post-apocalyptic one at the moment, which is not zombie; it's a bit more thriller based.
Yeah.
Um, and the other one I'm working on is it's a bit more sort of serial killer based. It's a little bit. I pitched it to someone, and I'd never actually seen the Poughkeepsie tapes, and I pitched this idea, and someone said, "Oh, that's a little bit like that in terms of that mockumentary on a serial killer."
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, there's other ideas that we had kicking around. Beth and I, when we developed Surrogate, we were writing. I think we're working on about 6 screenplays and ideas at the moment. And we'll probably go back to them. And one of them is around this idea of viral videos.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time when we're writing Surrogate, we were sending each other back and forth all those just strange videos that are around on the internet, like the I Feel Fantastic one. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot. The more you dive into it, and so we started writing a few ideas around those sorts of viral videos. But I'm not sure at this stage what subgenre of horror that would fall into.
Yeah, I'm thinking, what would it fall into apart from just like kind of found footage?
Yeah, because I mean, sometimes they get a bit mystery thriller. I mean, I know they're loosely based. Was it broadcast interruption or something? I can't remember the exact name of it. It was loosely based on the I
Oh,
Feel Fantastic video.
I'm not too sure. Oh, no, I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm not
Mm.
too sure which one that was.
Yeah, I think it might have been called broadcast interruption or interruption broadcast. There's a little bit of a tough title to get your tongue around.
Yeah.
But that was sort of inspired by that. But a lot of stuff we're doing was sort of mystery based. So I really like that idea, and that's what's appealing with paranormal, because you've always got sort of a mystery lay detective story going through it, which just gives you a little bit more to play with. If you're doing slashes, I really like slashes,
Mm-hmm.
and giallo, but that stuff you're not having to work too much. They're not as heavily story based
Yeah.
as paranormal stuff usually.
And paranormal, you have to make sure that you kind of like get the scares in right, if you know what I mean. Like it's just
Mm,
it can be tricky because I'm currently working on a paranormal one as well with my new short that I've got my notes written down. I just got
great.
to get it down now. Um, yeah, so now I was like, I got to try and make sure that it actually comes across creepy because jump scares they you get over them seriously. You got to make
Yeah.
sure you have that thing that's very subtle. I remember watching the
Mm,
trailer for The Strangers when it first came out, and that moment in the trailer where
mm.
Liv Tyler's standing in a lounge room, and then you see one of them come out from behind her, just no noise, no nothing. I was like, oh my god, this is going to be amazing. Unfortunately, wasn't the biggest fan of the film in the end, but that
Yeah.
moment, I was like, that's what we need in horror. Just no jump scares, no music, just something really subtle, just a creepiness.
Yeah, definitely. And that's always that tension between that sort of cheap thrill, and I mean almost every horror film has a good jump scare or two in it. It goes with the genre, but this over reliance of constant jump scares, I personally hate in the genre as well, and especially when it's not connected to the action.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of Jaws has that really good early jump scare with the when he's scuba diving and he finds the tooth in the hull of the bitten out boat,
Yeah.
and then the guy with his eye hanging out drifts in. I mean, that's the jump scare
Mm-hmm.
moment, but it's connected to the story. What I don't like this one is it's actually predictable in the way they shoot it. It's like we'll get the audience to look this way, and then we'll get them to look that way. So we think the jump is coming here, and we'll go there, but then we'll go back.
Mm-hmm.
Or they'll turn and they'll look, and there's the jump, and then we move on to the next scene. So it's not connected at all. So it really is just sort of a cheap thrill moment.
Yeah.
But films rely on that heavily, and in Stargate, that was kind of one of our rules. We weren't going to have too many. There was a couple in there. Like I said, the audience loves them, and we put them, especially when you put them early. We had, there's a jump scare in the second scene of the film, which is a little bit to do with more some character development.
Mm-hmm.
But it is that great bit because the audience going into a horror has that anticipation, and hopefully they're nervous as it starts. And you give them that jump, and then they relax, and then you start to ramp things up after that.
Exactly. Yeah, as long as it's actually there for a reason, not just for a little cheap thrill, because it does get a little monotonous after a while. It's like how you'd usually
Yeah.
have people looking in a fridge, open the door, and usually someone behind it. Now we're all waiting for someone to be behind
Yeah.
the fridge, but now there's no one there. Then you're like, wait, it's going to be somewhere else now. So I think horror fans
Yeah.
making the movie are actually kind of like combating those kind of false jumps.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing for sure, and it's how you work. Um, how you do get that effect where the audience isn't sort of seeing it coming,
Mm,
but setting it up in that way. And yeah, like I said, if it kind of connects into the story, or plays that function, because when it's done well in horrors, it really, really sort of shocks the audience. And especially said when it pays off a bit later down the track, or done in an original way. One that Beth and I, not so much it's a jump scare, but an example of just a really um, good use of building a scene and then just the way it's shot. And that is it The Lady in Black with Radcliffe, or Woman in Black? I keep mixing up.
Woman in Black.
Woman in Black. And the best moment in that is just when you see the rocking chair and it's
Mm,
going in and out of frame. And it's a static shot, and as it's going in and out, so we know there's a ghost of some sort because it's moving. And that point when it swings back up in and the ghost is actually in it is just an incredible, it's a great jump scare and a great moment, but it's built up.
mm-hmm,
And then it, pays off with that ghost down the track. It doesn't just kind of move on to the next moment.
mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So, well, you've already mentioned some things you have going on with your post-apocalyptic screenplay. Is there anything else you've got
Mm.
going on in the pipeline? Anything you want to share with us, an exclusive?
So, so yeah, I spent all of last year. I had this crazy idea. For some reason, at the start of last year, I was like, I'm going to write 4 feature films in a year, um, and
Wow.
really get a bunch of projects on the go. And it turned out to be a little bit ambitious, but you should be ambitious with your goal setting. And
Mm-hmm,
about halfway through the year, I decided I'd go and just make that three screenplays, but rewrites on 2 of them, because the one problem is that requires every 12 weeks you got to come up with a new idea, um, write the or develop the story. Because my approach, and this is what I look at with screenplay method, is you don't have the idea and write page one. It's you have an idea, you develop the story,
mm-hmm,
then you write the screenplay. So you've got an idea, develop the story, write the screenplay in 12 weeks. And what was really good about that is I realized that I could, when I was pushed right in that time frame. The one catch is you're never going to show your first draft, or you shouldn't show your first draft to anyone.
exactly.
In fact, even your second, I don't float any screenplays until the third draft, and that the first one that goes by is I've got a twin sister and she's my proofreader, so I send it to her, and then she'll give me some proofreading notes. We'll discuss a bit. I'll do another draft and force it out. Um, but last year actually wasn't kind of horror stuff. I was writing a war film, which I love war films, and I found this really cool idea that hasn't been done, set in World War II.
Mm-hmm,
Which is really fun to write, but they cost a lot more to make. So that one, that's kind of probably for a year, a couple of years down the track. I'm hoping I'll do a second feature and then I'll go on to that.
mm-hmm.
And then the others were in different genres. One actually was an action adventure one. It's sort of Goonies meets Stand By Me. It was just this idea that occurred to me, which are 2 of my favorite films from childhood. I was actually out in the Grampians National Park.
Yeah.
So I was out there, and I go out every winter for 1 week riding retreat, and I just go to a bush camp and make lots of fires and hang out and write. And I was writing another script. It was actually the apocalyptic one, and this idea occurred to me. So I started doing that one, but I can't say the title because it's a massive giveaway
Yeah.
on that film. But it's kids going off an adventure to find something that'll make a big difference to their family. And but like I said, I've just started this latest kind of, like I said, it's a bit like Mungo and Poughkeepsie Tape. So that's the sort of horror I'm writing at the moment. But I'm only about 4 weeks into that, so it's a bit early to give too much away.
It's nice to actually have this schedule for yourself, because basically with me, I'm kind of like, if I can fit it in, where I feel like there is times where if I have like a week off, I should really give myself like business hours essentially to work in and actually focus on it properly.
Yeah, and that's the key thing. I mean, it really is about writing's about discipline, and everyone has different times, that they're available in their schedule. And the best thing I remember reading was that it was like, doesn't matter if you've got 1 hour a week or 4 hours a day, whatever you've got, you protect that and you work for that time. And I just committed that year to to writing a lot, and the other jobs I do are on the side. And I work as a rock climbing instructor as well. So I just, that commitment, I was just sort of in the zone last week. And I said last year, once you push yourself, you start to get into a rhythm. It's like going to the gym or any regular activity.
Mm.
And so what I found is when I'd have to do a day of climbing guiding, you know, I'd have to be out at a cliff by 8:30. It's just like, we just got to get up at 6 and write, just get an hour of work in.
Mm.
And what happens is it accumulates over time. That's what I really like, that discipline of, if you do that work, it is very daunting. But if you just kind of go a bit each day or a bit each week, over time it accumulates. And the thing I was doing with that, Francis Ford Coppola is one of my favorite filmmakers, and um, he was talking about, you know, back when he started, obviously he's working on a typewriter, but each day as he's writing, he prints those pages off and puts them on his desk. So you just see your project and your productivity is just growing and growing. So yeah, that was helpful.
Well, I always tend to find that when I want to write, I'm at work, therefore I can't actually write anywhere. But I have a notebook with me all the time, and that's where everything goes into. And then when I get about 80 to 90% of where I want to be, that's where I actually can start writing. And then I put post-its on my door in orders of scenes or scenes that I want to have in, color coded as well, to be like, this is an alternative scene, like this could go either way, to actually see it's a map right in front of me, like a storyboard.
Yeah, and that's a great way, because also if it's up there, you're absorbing it, you know, on a conscious and a subconscious level. And I mean, that is one of the other things that, you know, I'm not encouraging procrastinating in writers, even though writers are gifted procrastinators. But there is that element, if you are doing that work, if you're taking notes or you're putting bits and pieces up, sometimes there is that gap in between. I mean, that's how creativity works. Sometimes it's when you're away from it that some ideas will hit. And I had that a couple of weeks ago, actually. I've been kind of writing every day for the week, and I got some stuff, but it all wasn't kind of quite working. And then Saturday morning, I was actually driving up to the Grampians to go rock climbing, and it was just like bang, 5 things hit me in a couple of minutes, because I just wasn't actually, I wasn't sitting at a desk saying I have to come up with that. Having said that, there is that type of writer who's not really writing. They're like, oh, I'm always just kind of thinking, or I'm going to get around to it, which is not how you're productive or get work out anyway. You know, there is an element where you do have to just sit down and put in the hours to do the work. So, and something will cover that. It's never wasted. It might be difficult, but it's never wasted, even if it's an hour sitting at your writing desk.
Yeah, you just got to figure out that thing of, like, people say, oh, one day I'm going to write this. You're like, well, you got to make that day come to you. You got to start the first step and then get closer to that day, so you can actually see that there's a finish line and you get it done.
Yeah. I think there's that thing about, even if you just write one sentence a day, which doesn't sound like, I mean, that's next to nothing to do, but really, I mean, if you want to write a novel and you write one sentence a day, you know, within a year or two, you're going to have your novel. And it's breaking it down. And that's where the structure back on screenplay method, because most of us, you know, myself included, not full-time writers that are getting paid all the time to be writing. And so the other approach I took with the course is how you break it down into manageable tasks, because it's overwhelming. I mean, to write a script, it's like standing at the base of Mount Everest and looking up. It's incredibly overwhelming, and you've got to break it down into those parts. And some of it actually is just, you have to write one sentence a day. You know, at certain points when you're developing things like a log line, and it is really that discipline that, you know, I think that's one of the other things I really learned with last year. It's like, if once you get into that discipline mode, it will start to come, because you're training your body and your mind to be there. You know, for some it'll be like, I know, you know, Stephen King, I know I don't know if he still does this, but for a very long time it was like his word count was 2,000 words a day.
Oh, wow.
You know, which is a lot. But for someone else, if you just go 200 words a day or whatever, but you have that same desk, and if you sit down every day and go, I have to do that, it just becomes sort of that routine and rhythm of it starts to give you kind of a fitness for the process. And that's what I really learned last year.
Yeah, I kind of worry that if I have to sit down and do something because I have to, I'm not going to enjoy what I've written, which is the thing I kind of fear about doing that as well. But that's why I like to kind of have a certain amount already kind of built up for myself, so I can fiddle around in that particular story that I'm going with.
Yeah, I mean, that's also what you're talking about. There is confidence to launch into that particular idea, and you know, that's why I think writers procrastinate a bit because it's not confident yet to launch into it, and it is kind of bubbling away. But I think it's even that I have certain days, and there's some of the best days where it is just with a whiteboard and you're just writing and scribbling scene ideas down. So you go, none of this actually has to matter. It might not be connected to it, but even if that's your one thing for the day, is just to go, even I'm going to write 5 possible ways that a scene could happen, or it's the classic creative of what if.
Mm-hmm.
So what if this was the case? And it's those little bits that will then spark it when you go away from it. But it's daunting. So it's really finding a way to make it less daunting.
Do you find yourself, because I do this, do you find yourself making backstories for characters and areas that don't even need to be featured ever in the story for the audience to see, but you do it just so you have a better understanding of where you're going?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because in screenplay method, the section where I'm talking about character development, talk about developing backstories and biographies for characters. And it doesn't matter that it doesn't find its way into the script. What that really does is informs the writer about that character.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives them a confidence about them. So that's a great process. And also, and I talk about this in the course, so it's really important to do for your antagonist,
Mm-hmm.
or your baddie or whatever, because if you spend some time, and it's even if you just write a couple of pages on what's their biography up to the point of where the story started. And I've found when you do that, is you at least you start to understand from their perspective why they're doing what they're doing. It actually makes them even more fun to write. And it will spark stuff. So again, any of this thing that's stimulating that process will give you little bits and pieces. I mean, it might hit on to, if you're doing, writing stuff about their backstory that's not going to make the film, but it might give you an idea about kind of how they speak, or a particular attitude they have, or a costume. Something like that can always come from it. So again, they're all valuable things. It's not like when you're sitting down to write, everything you're writing is what's going to be on the page in your screenplay in the film.
Yeah. So something that I tend to do, I start with usually like it's a line of dialogue that I like, and then I go on with that, or it's like an image that I like, and that kind of starts. What's something that probably triggers you to get into a story initially?
Yeah, it varies actually. I mean, sometimes I don't know if I've had a particular line of dialogue. I mean, part of it's if it's a genre that I'm interested in. It's also when an idea captures you, and you go, oh, not only am I interested in that, but that, can I make it work? That's the other bit. And the other thing is also, is there a feature film in it? So when Beth and I were developing ideas for Surrogate, we're brainstorming about 6 or 7 ideas for a couple of months. And a few of them just went by the wayside. So like, oh, that's really interesting. We're going to go, there's only about 30 minutes of story in that. So, and sometimes it's I mean, so the action adventure one that I'm writing with the sort of Stand By Me meets Goonies is my real passion outside of filmmaking, is rock climbing and being in the outdoors. So I always want to do something that encompasses things like caving and rock climbing and outdoor adventure stuff. So that was sort of the impetus. And then I just found this idea where I could start combining all of those, putting all those elements into the screenplay. But the story got me excited. And probably the final bit, that once you have that idea, is it also like, are you into it enough to put in the time that it's going to take to write and then get the film made?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the moment you said Goonies and Stand By Me, the inner 80s movie fan just lost my mind.
Yeah.
Absolute favorites, those movies. Like, I
Oh,
actually,
they're great.
when I was doing the writing course I did after high school, I actually did one that was kind of like an Australian Stand By Me,
Yeah.
like little short story that I wrote. Yeah.
Oh,
So
great. Oh,
yeah.
yeah, they're great. They're great films. I mean, the 80s is a great era of filmmaking as well. There's so many gems that came out from there, and those ones have really stood the test of time, which is very hard with any art form. But they play as well now. And what was fun on Surrogate, when 3 of the cast we had they were 9 years old, and one of the girls, Ali, who was playing the ghost, was really getting into 80s cinema. So I give her all these recommendations of Ghostbusters and Goonies and those sorts of things, and then she'd go away and watch them, and at rehearse we'd discuss them, and it was great seeing that that generation is loving them as much as we did when they came out.
No, that's so good because I've got a younger sister who I gave her 80s movie vacation to as well. So it was Lost Boys, it was Goonies, it was Ghostbusters. So yeah, it's so good that they actually do stand the test of time, because also Back to the Future is actually one of my favorite trilogies
Yeah.
ever. And if people haven't seen it, what is your problem? How have you not
Yeah.
seen this movie yet? And I work with some younger girls at work who haven't seen certain movies, like they haven't seen Return to Oz. So I was like, well,
Oh, okay.
your homework is to go see Return to Oz. It's on Disney Plus. You have to go see it. If you want to see what Oz would like if Tim Burton got his hands on it, that's what it looks like.
It's funny because Return to Oz it's had a bit of a resurgence. It gets talked a lot about how freakish it is for a kids film, and I remember when I saw it when I was young. It's got some really kind of terrifying moments in it. So I'm actually thinking I'm going to go back and rewatch it again because it's been a while for that one.
Yeah, it's just because I was showing it to a friend probably about 10 years ago. And because when I saw it, I was quite young. I didn't understand everything that was happening to Dorothy.
Mm.
And then my friend's like, they're going to give her electroshock therapy. Do you understand what they're doing? I was like, I didn't even notice. Huh. I just
Yeah,
watched it.
yeah. I mean, it's just that, like Dark Crystal. I was watching that again a couple of years ago, and that's got some really disturbing stuff in it. Not just the Skeksis, but the scene when they're on the can't remember the name of them. They got the really long legs and they run really fast.
Yeah, I can't remember the name.
Whatever their names are, and then when they get attacked by those huge bug things. I remember as a kid that scene was really traumatizing. Watching as an adult, I'm like, this is kind of really full on. One gets kind of caught up and then thrown off a cliff to its death and that sort of stuff. So 80s had some pretty twisted stuff for kids films.
Yeah, but we're 80s kids. We're built tough. That's just how we are.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So they were great films back then.
Oh, yeah. But then again, I used to get kind of scared by things that usually wouldn't scare people. I got scared by critters to the point my
Oh
parents were like,
yeah.
okay, that's a bit really kind of thing. But then also, I got scared by the Banshee and Darby O'Gill and the Little People. Have you ever seen that one?
No, I haven't actually seen that. I have to
Yeah.
put that on my
It,
list. Yeah.
it's a Sean Connery movie from like the 60s. And yeah, just this Banshee they had in it. It was just like that, putting
Mm.
film over film special effect for it. And it scared the hell out of me as a child. But like, it's a Disney children's film. Why am I getting scared by this? But then again, I was
Yeah.
scared by Gozer in Ghostbusters when I was a kid. I had to leave the
Oh
room
yeah.
when she was on.
Yeah, yeah. I get it's all relative at what age you sort of see stuff and what effect it has. So
Mm.
yeah, those things are uh, yeah, different things people traumatizing kids at different ages. So I'm trying to think which stuff I found, scary that wouldn't seem that scary now. I mean, Temple of Doom, but that's still pretty kind of brutal. But Raiders of the Lost Ark, when that came out, that had some really gruesome kind of moments in it. But I mean, Jaws is meant as a horror, and that's one of the other ones I saw when I was young. Actually, my parents are out, and I snuck the VHS and started watching it. And when the whatever the name, the kid who gets chomped when he's on his lilo, but I think it's the second one.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that guttural sound as he's getting chomped. And I actually just had to stop it. I was like, this is too much.
But it's a rite of passage, though. It's a rite of passage for us
Mm.
to sneak a horror movie and watch it. I did it all the time when I was a kid because my parents constantly brought them in the house, so it's their own fault. They shouldn't have brought them in the
Yeah,
house.
yeah. And everyone does have that horror film they will recall as an adult, but when they were, child, or even sometimes they're teenagers or whatever, that so utterly freaks them out that they have to sleep in their parents' room or have to sleep with the light on, or it sticks with them for a long time. And yeah, I think it's also when you watch it. We did have one day was when Surrogate was at the cinema because when we're running sessions, always someone from the cast or crew or a few of us were there to do an introduction and a Q&A. And someone had brought along their kids who are about 8 or 9, and they kind of ended up walking out in tears, terrified at the end, which is kind of tragic. But deep down, I kind of go, well, everyone's going to have that horror film that sticks with them for the rest of their life that terrified them. So hopefully, Surrogate is that for these kids at least.
Yeah, exactly. 20 years' time, I was like, I watched maybe Surrogate and it freaked me out. Good. That's what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, if
Or,
people walk out of a horror film laughing and happy, you've kind of failed a bit, unless it was a horror comedy.
yeah, exactly. So what advice would you give to writers trying to get started in the industry?
Um, I mean, so the key thing is honing your skills and learning to write. Probably the biggest trap we all fall in when we're younger is it's like I watch films, so I know how to write a film. I mean, I listen to lots of music and I can't play an instrument to save my
Same.
life. So it's really about learning how to write. So, the three main things is studying writing. There's lots of stuff online. There's lots of courses, and that I also include listening to other writers talk about their projects. Actually doing the writing itself. So like anything, and it's the same if you want to direct, whatever it is practicing that thing. And the other part is studying existing films. So I'd say watching a wide variety of stuff. I mean, even as a child, I like films going back to the 1930s and from across all genres and eras, and different countries as well. I love Italian cinema. I watched a lot of that as a teenager, not just horror stuff. Like I loved Argento, but Bernardo Bertolucci. And part of that study is reading screenplays. That's really crucial. So not just watching films, which is a good way to learn, but actually reading screenplays. There's so many available online. And when I started reading them and marking them up, you just start to really see how the form works in terms of setting it out,
Yeah.
but also just what how then it translates from how you see it as sort of this working document and then how it's translated onto the screen. Yeah, you can learn a lot from doing that. I think if you sit down and read in 1 week 10 screenplays, you'll automatically be a better writer for that reason.
I completely agree, because one of the first things I did when I wanted to learn how to format it properly is I got some Quentin Tarantino ones. So for
I
like
get, yeah.
Inglorious Bastards and whatnot. So I can actually say, like, okay, oh, so that's how he got that image from that. So yeah, it just gives you a
Mm.
better understanding. So no, it's very good advice.
Yeah, and it's just an interesting way to read them. I'd love to going back and reading certain films that I loved. Uh, Particularly, I remember reading the screenplay. Psycho is a really good one to read. That's available online. But also Double Indemnity, which is one of my favorite films. And to go back and read the original screenplay it's just very witty. Like the film itself is witty in the dialogue. Um, but the wit just sort of comes across in the way it's written, and I sort of learned from that about how you get tone across in the screenplay as well.
Yeah.
And Beth, when we're writing Surrogate, Beth's very good at that. I learned a lot working with her as well. She's very good at putting that visual idea, not just for the cast and crew, but if you read that screenplay, if it's a horror screenplay, you want it to feel tense, or your use of language. I think one of the descriptions, it's, even though it's holding hands, but it's like, it says, oh, she's clawing her hand.
Mm-hmm.
So Double Indemnity and other good screenplays get that kind of visual into your head as well.
Would another piece of advice you give to writers to not be as precious with everything that's on the page because it may not make the screen?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, two things are going to happen is stuff's going to get cut out. But I mean, when you get into rehearsal, you might realize you don't need certain things when you shoot it, or sometimes you might not get around to shooting absolutely every scene. You always run out of time and money, and then when you get into the edit, you'll cut stuff. I mean, Surrogate was a really tight script. I think it was 86 pages, and so we thought that was really tight. And we actually cut about 6 or 7 scenes from the film in the edit just to make the story work better. But I'd say don't be precious about what's in there, but also your first ideas are not always going to be your best.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's one of the things I've learned. It's getting pretty brutal with it. And just because you've written something or you like it, you got to cut it out if it's not working.
Yeah.
And certainly, if every scene idea in your screenplay is the first time, that's the only ideas you've had, then you just haven't investigated the idea enough.
Yeah.
In fact, probably the most brutal, if the advice, if I had my time again, I would write my first feature film and then throw it in the bin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think that's a bit learned. Like having written, now I'm getting up to probably about the 9th or 10th screenplay, and a lot of writers talk about that. It's taken you nearly 10 feature films to get to that point when you really start to understand writing. Now, there are certain writers out the gate that will do really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we don't really want to, be comparing ourselves to that rarefied group.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, it'll take a bunch of guys to have a crack at it. And
Mm.
if I look back at the first screenplays I wrote, with that hindsight, I'm just like, yeah, I can see why they got picked up.
Yeah, no, I've experienced that with the second one that I put out called Only by Night. There was this big scene in it. I'm like, this has to be a big turning point for this character. And then you look back at it a couple of weeks later, I was like, why do I need that? I don't need that. Scrap
Mm,
it, make it more tight. You can convey all that you need in an image or a line that's said. So just, yeah,
mm.
just to not be too precious edits.
Yeah, for sure. And for the most part, I mean, if I was going to go with, I don't want to be picking on specific films, but generally speaking, the overall kind of criticism I'd have of most films I see at the cinema, and this would be for the last several years, is they're all a bit longer than they need to be. Sometimes, it might be 15 or 20 minutes, and there's some that are 30, 40 minutes longer than they need to be. And I'm not sure why this trend has kind of crept in. You get these films that are 2 hours and 15 minutes, and you go, 15 years ago, that would have been an hour 45 to two.
Mm-hmm.
So, when it's shorter for the most part, it will get better. And also, production will teach you that. I mean, there's certain things just to, when I'm reading scripts now with people doing my course, because I also do script consultations and feedback. If they haven't had a film made before, which is often the case, that's when you see things are a lot longer, because it just takes experience to learn what will kind of come across, and what you do and don't need. And I even learned that directing first feature film. My scripts I write now or even that tighter, because I've just know now that I can get what is, you can get done in an image rather than, a 30-second scene.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because as much as I love
Mm.
Peter Jackson's work, we did not need a 3-hour King Kong. It
No, I mean, I don't kind of like commenting too much on like filmmakers are still around, but that is an absolutely god awful film in every conceivable way.
like just because because you can doesn't mean that you have to. It could have
Yeah,
been such a tighter film. Like, it was visually stunning to look at, but you
yeah,
don't need an hour to get in there, hour there, hour off, mate.
yeah.
Sorry.
One of my best mates picked that. We alternate picking films, and he always normally picks trash, and he picked that one. And I was sitting there watching it, and at a point, I was like, "Oh, we still haven't had the New York sequence." And because everything's so expanded, and I'm like, we're 2 hours into it. And I actually remember I had to go out and make a few work calls, and I went out and did that and got back and still saw a good 20, 25 minutes of the New York sequence. And yeah, I mean, I think that just came about from he had a blank check because of the success he'd given the studios with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And I really like the original. I know his passion for it, but, you know, um, in fact, I think the best thing that came out from King Kong, and this would be really good for any of your viewers who are filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers, it was a bunch of behind the scenes things they did. I think it's called the King Kong Diaries,
Mhm.
and they followed all these different aspects of production, and that's a really great little film school. You really see how all of the processes that went into making it, but not just your typical things that are covered. They spent a day following the person who's going around and taking the dailies to the lab and bringing them back for viewings and stuff. So I'd sit and watch that again, but not the film.
Oh, so it's King Kong Diaries.
Yeah, I believe it's called the King
Okay.
Kong Diaries. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a note of that and try and find that because I'm interested now.
Yeah, and I really I mean, growing up watching any kind of filmmaking docos, that is the other great way to learn. And
Mm,
and I'm not particularly interested in, there is the marketing style that they put out, the very slick ones, especially for big films like Marvel. But
mhm.
really interested in more the ones that are on that actual filmmaking process, because you learn a lot. There's a good one I watched yesterday. It only goes for about 8 or 9 minutes, but it was on the visual effects for the Godzilla film that came out last year, Godzilla -1.
Oh,
And and they showed how they did all the visual effects with a very small crew, working in one office, and it was a really good insight on, because I really enjoyed the film, and just talked about how they managed to get the amount of effects for the lack of people and budget that they had. So
yeah. Well, that's everything I had for you today, mate.
excellent. Oh, we could
Yeah,
keep going on filmmaking.
yeah.
So
So, yeah, thank you, David, for being on. I really appreciate you giving your time for us today, especially on this terribly hot day. Hopefully, you haven't been sweating it out too much where you are.
I don't have aircon, but I'm surviving just.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you for tuning into the episode today. I really appreciate your time. Like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with your mates, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.